Can? Meula. Okay, so hi everyone, and thanks for coming. Welcome to the Minerva-Gentner Symposium. I just wanted to say a few words, actually very few words, about the history that went into organizing this symposium. I and my co-investigator, Professor Thomas Zatig from the University of Tübingen have been, actually, if I remember correctly, we have been planning, hi Thomas, we have been planning this conference, I think for 4 years. Originally we were, so I approached Thomas to apply for the grant that would fund this conference, I think in 2021. We did not get it, but we got it a year later. And the original plan was to have this workshop around the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024. Then we decided in favor of the first half of 2024, but of course then October 7th happened, so that became impossible. Then we moved it by half a year, and another half a year, and another half a year, and eventually, briefly, the idea also came up to move it to Tübingen. That didn't work out logistically. And in the end, we settled for this date. And I'm very happy that in the end, this workshop is happening. We had to make it hybrid, but I'm still really happy that it's taking place. And I'm also really happy that it's taking place in Israel. Also happy that some of the participants from the German side made it, but I'm also grateful for those who didn't, that they are contributing to this workshop over Zoom. Most of the talks we are going to record, except those where the presenters chose to opt out. And what else? Well, I'm just saying thanks for coming. I'm very committed to bringing back international events to Israel and to Tel Aviv University, and I hope that this will be an opening shot to having a lot more. So I hope this will be fun. That's it, thanks. Oh, sorry, and the first speaker is going to be Yair Levy from our own Tel Aviv University on intentions or agency, sorry.
Something like that. Okay, thank you, good morning. And just before I start, I just wanted to thank David for putting together what looks to be an excellent workshop. I think we all know how much hard work goes into organizing these things, so thank you for doing that. I should also probably apologize because I'm going to have to miss a few of the talks tomorrow and on Wednesday while I teach. So apologies to the speakers whose talks I'll be missing. Okay, so my topic here, as you can see from the title, is, let's say, indirectly related to the theme of this workshop, but if you have any issues with that, you need to take that up with the organizer, because he was well aware of the fact that I don't really work in these areas. He was happy to have me, apparently. Anyway, so the topic is joint action, collective action, and more specifically, the kind of fundamental question of what is the nature of such action, or cooperation, as I'll sometimes call it. I take these to be interchangeable. And I'm going to be rejecting the kind of standard received view of what joint action is or involves, and I'm going to defend an alternative, what I call dynamic account. Is there a message? Oh, sound quality is poor. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, right, so this is the plan. I'm going to start by just briefly introducing the standard received view, which works by positing joint intentions, and I'll say why, sort of list a few problems that this view I think has. I'll then go on to discuss a strategy that's become popular in recent years of trying to overcome these problems by relaxing some of the conditions on joint intentions, and I'll tell you why I think that's not very promising. And then I'll briefly discuss an objection to what I argue for in the section 2, and finally I'll set out and defend my alternative preferred view, what I call the dynamic account of joint action. Okay, so the basic question here it can be framed with by saying that, by asking in virtue of what are two agents doing something together, like walking together, rather than just walking alongside each other. And I'm going to be focusing, as is kind of customary in this literature, on small scale action, 2, 3 agents doing something together without any kind of asymmetric power relations or any social infrastructure involved. The hope is that we can build those in later on. We'll start with the easier stuff, hopefully. And the dominant answer to this question is that it's in virtue of their having a joint intention. There's this passage that I have on this slide from a recent-ish collection on joint action, which, although it's kind of long, I think it's worth reading in full just because it describes the strategy, but also gives you a kind of idea into the rationale behind it. So it says that there need not be any outward difference between my raising an arm and my arms rising. And similarly, there need not be any behavioral difference between two people who happen to walk adjacent to each other and the same people going for a walk together. Most answers to the question of how my raising my arm differs from my arms rising refer to the intention involved in the former but not in the latter. And in response to the question about how going for a walk together differs from merely walking adjacent to each other, an answer that's become increasingly popular in the past 2 and 3 decades also refers to an intention, the collective intention to go for a walk together. Right, so again, it kind of describes the strategy, but also how the thought is that we can build on the credentials of the individual story of action, how we explain individual action in terms of individual intention and do the same for collective action. But I think that's problematic. Before I describe the problems, I just want to give you in a bit more detail. I'm not going to read this one out, don't worry. But just the kind of most influential account of joint intention in the literature that comes from Michael Bratman. This is what he calls the condensed statement of the view. Again, I'm not going to read it out, but you could do that for yourselves. This has been an extremely influential view, both inside philosophy, but also outside philosophy and psychology of joint action. Often draws on Bratman's view. And again, the details won't matter that much, but the basic idea is that we can reduce joint intention into individual attitudes, individual intentions, individual beliefs that each cooperating agent has. And each of these attitudes is kind of co-referring, I suppose, to mesh with the others, as Bratman puts it. There are other models of joint intention out there. If you're familiar with this, there are we mode accounts of joint intention. I'm not going to go into that because the details are not going to matter very much for the criticisms that I'm going to describe now. Some of these are issues that have been noticed, have been discussed in the literature, others have not. So the first problem, I think, with this view is that we have a problem with the Zoom. Oh, with the Zoom. Oh, sorry. Should I stop or? Okay. Right. So one of the issues with this view is that it seems to exclude cooperation among creatures who are just not sophisticated enough to have this kind of psychological machinery that Bratman thinks is necessary. So, some animals like ants, bees, and wolves seem to cooperate in foraging and nest building and defense. It's not clear that they're minded at all, let alone that they have this kind of sophisticated psychology. Primates, which have been studied quite extensively in this literature, I would say most people would agree that they are minded, but they do seem to lack the kind of mind-reading abilities that would be required to instantiate Bratman's model. And finally, children, who certainly do together. There's a lot of evidence that already from a very young age, by the first year, children engage in exercises of joint attention, and by the second year...
Can you lean closer to the microphone? Maybe
lean closer to... Okay. This is as close as I can get without swallowing it, but yeah. Right, so children, as I say, do cooperate, but they seem to lack, they again, generally agree that they lack the mentalistic concepts that this model assumes, like concepts like intents and believes. And in fact, it's a kind of common view in this literature that the way children learn these concepts is by engaging in these joint actions. So, you know, it can't presuppose they're having these concepts. Okay. So that's one problem. Another kind of problem comes from cases of more spontaneous joint actions, right? So here's an example from Christopher Kutz, so he describes a picnic, right? We're having a picnic and it begins to rain. I jump up and grab the sandwiches and head for the car. And I intend to do my part of our saving the picnic, hoping that you will simultaneously grab the drinks and the blanket. If you do, then it's reasonable to say that we will have jointly saved the picnic, right? But there's nothing kind of premeditated, pre-planned. It's all more nothing that kind of meshes together or anything like that. Each has his intentions to do their part and expects the other to do their part. And they're also kind of related to this. There are also cases of kind of more accidental, fortuitous cooperation, right? Cases where, you know, I come with an idea and I tell you my idea and we start brainstorming or whatever. I start telling a joke and you finish it, so on. All these things that don't really depend on any intentions meshing or anything. They're much more spontaneous than that. Another problem that hasn't been, I think, noticed in this literature is that it's just this kind of preoccupation with joint intention runs the risk of marginalizing joint action, which is, after all, what we are after. It's a kind of target phenomenon here. And one way of bringing this out is that by noticing that there'll be a problem of causal deviance. So even if you do have joint intentions in place, it's not clear how you're going to get from that to joint action, given that there could be causal deviance, which is, of course, a big problem for the individual case, explaining the individual action in terms of individual intentions. So as I said, I think this problem hasn't been noticed. In a kind of rare acknowledgement of this from Michael Bratman's book, he says that even if, in view of the problem of causal deviance, we must grant in the end a kind of conceptual non-reducibility of individual intentionality of action, we can still go on to see how we should proceed with shared intentional action. I just think that's a kind of puzzling response to this problem, because given that the building blocks of the Bratmanian model of intention is not individual actions, it's individual attitudes. So even if you do accept a kind of non-reducibility of individual action, that's not going to help you to explain joint action if you're going to use individual intentions and attitudes to do that. So the problem is going to resurface at the collective level. Okay, so that's section 1 done with. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I have no idea when we started, but you'll tell me?
You're 10 minutes.
Okay, good,
Yeah,
cool.
Let's say we lost 2 minutes.
Okay, so you owe me 2 minutes. Okay, so
20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay.
I mean, you have 20 minutes. Sorry, I should have said this. Like, the sections that 1 hour, I recommend to give yourself 30 minutes for the talk and 30 for Q&A. If you want to go a few minutes longer and just have a shorter Q&A, that's also fine. It's up to you.
Okay, cool. Right, okay, so what I want to do now is describe the strategy that's been gaining ground recently, where the thought is that we could get around these problems and have an account of joint action in terms of either joint intentions light or joint goals, right? So I thought we can relax the conditions on what having a joint intention involves, and maybe that'll help us. But before that, let me just mention that, again, maybe for the sake of those of you who are familiar with this literature, that Bratman himself, at some point, retreats from the idea that what he's trying to do is give an account of joint action, and claims that his model is only supposed to offer sufficient conditions, and that will get around most of these problems, and that's, of course, fine as far as it goes. I think it kind of deflates the original question and makes it a lot less interesting, but you could go that way. I want to kind of retain the ambition of accounting for joint action, not just giving sufficient conditions. So what is the strategy of watering down joint intentions? Well, the thought is that, again, we could provide a less demanding, more relaxed idea of what a joint intention involves, or even substitute this notion of joint intention with a joint goal, which is a non-mentalistic kind of thing. It's basically a state of affairs, which is supposed to, which aims to bring about, the action is the aims to bring that up. That's what the collective goal is. I'm not going to worry about what this aiming metaphor comes down to. That's not going to matter here. We should notice that the notion of goal here is supposed to be a joint goal, a collective goal, right? So it's the state of affairs that our joint goal is bringing about only if it's acting together is meant to bring about this collectively. So there's a distinction here between individual goals and collective goals, and we can see the distinction with, if we look at this example, right? So if you take a sentence like the shots saved the patient's life, you can read that, can give that a distributive reading where each shot individually saved the patient's life, or you could give it a collective reading, which is what we're after here, wherein neither of the shots were individually sufficient to save the patient's life, but they collectively were. So that's the notion of a collective goal, state of affairs that the action aims to bring about collectively. And the problem with that is, I think, that it's just not necessary. Neither joint intention light or these joint goals are going to be necessary for joint action. So I think you can see this by looking at a few examples. So for example, when we play a game with other people, we could have each have different aims. So you could play the game with someone with the aim of winning and, getting the satisfaction that brings, or you could do it in order to develop your own skills or to help others develop their skills and so on and so forth. There are other aims you could have in mind, or you can have some combination of these. It doesn't have to be, I think, a joint goal or aim that we're both aiming at. Now, you might wonder whether, even if we do have these different aims in playing the game together, whether in fact there isn't some sort of ultimate shared goal that we do, that's kind of all these other aims contribute to achieving or something like that. I don't know. I don't think that is necessary. I think there's something forced about it. I think there are generally cases, like, for example, if you're playing a game with a highly competitive child, as I sometimes do, it does seem like all they care about is winning. And then the cooperation is not maintained by us having a joint goal or aim, but by the kind of design of the game. The rules and so on maintain cooperation where the aims are not necessarily shared. But I do want to allow, and I think that's absolutely true, that we do need to have a similar conception or understanding of what's going on. So to take an example that actually comes from David, if I think we're jogging together and you think that we're involved in a kind of Squid Games race to the death, then we're probably not doing something together. But that's not because we lack a joint aim or goal, it's because we just don't have a similar idea of what's going on. So that's a matter of the kind of beliefs we have about what's going on, and I think those need to be at least similar, if not shared. Here's another example of, I think, of joint action without joint intentions or goals. So imagine that you're painting your house by yourself, and your only goal is that the house be painted with as little time and effort as you can manage. And then at one point I show up and I see you hard at work. I decide to help, but I don't care at all whether the house ends up being painted or not. All I care about is spending quality time with you, my dear friend that I haven't seen in a long while. So I offer my help and you gratefully accept, realizing that it furthers your own aim. So you hand me a brush and a can of paint and I roll my sleeves and dive in. So I think in cases like this, we are doing something together, we are performing a joint action. But our goals, and that's because we do things like, which are going to be important for my constructive account later, we do things like divide the work between us and help each other. And, we're careful not to interrupt with one another's work and so on. But we don't necessarily have the same goal. Our goals are different. Your goal is to get the house painted as quickly as possible. My goal is to spend time with you. And in fact, I think that we can see that it's possible for our goals to be in conflict, right? Because you want to finish painting as soon as possible, whereas I just want to spend more and more time with you. So for all I care, we could just do this all day long. Okay. Now, briefly to an objection to my previous conclusion. You might kind of want to insist that, well, there still needs to be some shared intention or goal after all to keep this thing as a joint cooperative project. So even when I'm playing with that hyper-competitive child who shall not be named, we need to at least share the intention of the goal of playing the game together, right? And if we're painting the house together, you might insist, well, we need to at least share the intention or goal of painting the house together. Others, that's not going to happen. I have two responses to that, one kind of more hardline and the other more concessive. The hardline one is, no, not really. I don't think it needs to be a part of your goal that we paint the house together. And I think we can see this by noticing that if at some point I kind of, I've had enough and I peel off, you might be more than happy to just do it on your own. You might want to deny that in that case there really is a kind of joint action here. That's kind of hard to argue about. My own intuition is that we are doing something together. This is a joint project, but you might have other intuitions. So that's a kind of more hardline response. The more concessive response allows that there might be some sort of thin residual sense of joint intention goal in place here. But I think in that case, it's just going to be too thin to be of any real explanatory value. Basically, I think it doesn't tell us this kind of thin notion of joint goal or joint intention, what we're trying to achieve or what would be the successful endpoint, what sort of means we should be taking, what to do if we've hit a snag or anything like that, which are precisely the sort of things that we expect individual intentions to do for us when we're using that to explain individual action, which was, as you'll recall, the kind of inspiration for this explanatory strategy to begin with. And I just think it's another interesting case study to look at, which comes from the pragmatics of conversation, which I think brings this out, where, of course, there's this hugely influential Gricean line that assumes that conversation is essentially cooperative. Of course, there's a lot of debate over how cooperative and whether it's necessarily cooperative, so on. I won't get into that. But what's important for me, what I think is helpful to notice, is that I think Grice himself allows, and if not, then we should allow, that each agent who's engaged in the conversation may only intend for the other to recognize what she means. Right? So, imagine some sort of form of conversation where maybe a press conference or something like that, where a politician is trying to get their message across. They might only care about that, and we still have a conversation going, even if there's no joint intention or goal here. And even if we are supposed to aim to understand, we do need to aim to understand each other. Those are, I think, still kind of mirroring individual distributive goals rather than collective goals. Okay, that's the third section done with. I'm on to the final section of describing, with the time I have left, my constructive proposal of how we can and should understand joint action without positing joint intentions or goals. So this also serves to, I think, strengthen the negative case of this paper, because it shows you that, well, we can do this. And here's a way of doing it. So we don't really need joint intentions or goals. Okay. So now how much time do I have left? Sorry.
Like 7,
Okay.
8 minutes.
Should be. Okay, so I think a good place to start is by taking a closer look at some of the counterexamples I gave to the joint intention model earlier, and ask what makes it the case that these two agents are, in those examples, doing whatever it is they're doing together. If it's not, they're having a joint intention or goal. And I think intuitively the answer is, well, it's in virtue of what each of them is doing or how they're doing it, where this is, of course, supposed to go beyond the platitude, well, they're doing it together. Right, so he's, again, a kind of intuitive way of fleshing out this thought, right? When we're carrying a sofa together, then obviously each of us will be doing it slightly differently than have we been doing it ourselves. So we'll be carrying it from a different place, carrying less weight on, and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of intuitive thought that I want to unpack in the time I have left, set out some of the kind of constituents of joint action, and then try to tie them together and give something that looks like an account. So here's a list of the sort of things that I think are characteristic, sort of things we do when we do something together that are kind of characteristic of joint action. Things like dividing the labor and avoiding interference and helping and so on. This list is obviously not meant to be exhaustive, and it shouldn't really be controversial. The point that I hope is of interest is that really this is all we need. We don't need to go beyond that and postulate joint intentions or anything like that. Now, of course, in some cases of joint action, at least certain sequences, there might be none of these sub-actions that I've just listed in the previous slide. Right, so if we go back to how I've framed the question to begin with, how it's often framed, there need be no behavioral outward difference between two people who just happen to be walking side by side and two people walking together. And that's why, for this reason, because there need be no behavioral difference, that's why it's important to bring into the picture also the kind of dispositions that each of us has when we're doing this thing. Are we disposed to help the other, avoid interfering, so on and so forth? And by saying that, I don't mean to be relying on any kind of account of what dispositions are, a notoriously difficult question. But I don't think you need to postulate any kind of account of dispositions. Just think of the literature on the dispositional account of beliefs. That doesn't work necessarily by positing any particular account of dispositions. Now, of course, you might wonder whether I'm not, in fact, bringing back joint intentions or goals through the back door by speaking of the dispositions that each of us have, because aren't those going to be grounded in something like a joint intention or goal? I don't think so. Not necessarily anyway. I mean, I've already argued against the joint intention thing, but this proposal is not meant to be committed to this idea. I think we can see the dispositions here being grounded in each agent's individual intentions or attitudes, or maybe also in non-psychological mechanisms if we're happy to countenance cooperation between mindless creatures. I'm not building on that. What are they? Kind of more constructively, what are these dispositions grounded in, and what could they be grounded in? Well, I think looking at the psychological literature here could be helpful. So psychologists talk sometimes of what they call emergent coordination, things like coming to synchronize the frequency of a rocking in a rocking chair, or audiences clapping after a show. Environmental conditions are also part of what could ground these dispositions, things like joint affordances. People might be familiar with this idea of an affordance, right? What the kind of opportunities that an object presents to you to act on it, right? Think of a chair as inviting you to sit on it. So the idea of joint affordances is that you can have these invitations to perform joint actions. So for example, think of a two-handed picnic basket, which kind of affords lifting it in a certain way if two people are doing this rather than one. So that's another thing, one of these things that could ground the relevant dispositions here. Game design, I've mentioned games earlier, rules, norms, conventions, so on. So tying these kind of together and giving a first pass, which will requires some refinement in a minute, but the first pass of what the nature of joint action comes to is this, that when two agents are doing something together, each agent is playing their part in doing it, and moreover, each agent is acting or is disposed to act in ways that facilitate the other person's fying and refraining, or disposed to refrain from ways that would impede their fying. And just briefly to kind of hopefully establish or do something to start establish the credentials of this account, I want to quickly go through some cases that any account of joint action should exclude and show you that this account does that. Cases of antagonistic action, right? So just imagine two treasure hunters who are independently going after the same treasure trove. Obviously, they're not performing a joint action, and that's on this account, that's because given that they're rivals, they're not disposed to help the other. In fact, they're disposed to frustrate the other's efforts to the extent that they're aware of them. Another kind of antagonistic action comes from Michael Bratman, his mafia case, where you get two mobsters who intend to go to New York together, and each mobster intends to do this by throwing the other mobster into the trunk of their car and driving to New York. Of course, if they act on their intentions, there's not going to be any joint action here. Bratman himself is led by these kind of cases to postulate these, complicated joint intentions with individual intentions that co-refer and all that thing that I criticized earlier. On my account, we don't get a joint action here because if one of these mobsters manages to execute their intention, then the other is not going to be in any position to reciprocate. Here's another example of a case that should be excluded by accounts of joint action. This one comes from Steve Butterfield. It's not an antagonistic action, but I think it's not a case of joint action either. And that's going to lead me to refine the account a little bit towards the very end in a couple of minutes. So this is a case of two strangers who happen to be so configured that they're collectively blocking the aisle of a plane. The first passenger correctly anticipates that the other passenger, who's a complete stranger, will not be moving from her current position for some time. This creates an opportunity for the first passenger. She intends that she and the stranger block the aisle together, and as it happens, the second passenger's thoughts mirror the first. Butterfield uses this to argue against joint intention accounts, but I think it could be used against my account as well. And the point I want to make, and as I said, this is going to involve some. Okay, a couple more minutes, but I'll try. Is that in many of those individual actions that characterize joint action, they involve extending your agency to the other person and seeing them as a kind of means to your own ends. But what's special about these cases, like the aisle blocking case from Butterfield, is that in those cases, each agent treats the other merely as a means. Whereas I think acting together involves viewing them not merely as a means, but also facilitating their own ends. So there's a kind of faint Kantian echo here, which you've probably noticed. I'm not sure what to do with that, but I think it is relevant. So this is the kind of worked out account, anyway, with this refinement. It says that when two agents are fying together, each of them is playing a part in their fying, and is acting or is supposed to act in ways that facilitate the other's fying, where this is not meant to exclusively facilitate their own fying, and refraining or is supposed to refrain from acting in ways that will impede the other's fying, where this is, again, not meant to exclusively facilitate her own fying. Okay, just one very final thing, and then I'll stop. One kind of loose end is cases of what you might call minimal coordination. So think of commuters on a busy subway platform, or coordinating their movements to avoid running into each other. You might kind of worry that an account like mine will rule these cases in as a kind of case of joint action, whereas in fact it isn't. I did mention coordination as a key element. So, I mean, in reply to that, I mean, I think we don't have a clear intuition as to whether these are really cases of joint action or not. And I've heard people go out both ways. And I think it's a virtue of this account that it's flexible enough to accommodate the opposing intuitions here. So if you think there is joint action here, you might emphasize the role of coordination in facilitating joint action. If not, you might focus on what's missing, the other elements that are not coordination, that are not present here. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.